Today, a friend shared an image of a billboard paid for by Newsom for governor, the campaign arm of Gavin Newsom's bid to be re-elected in California. I don't live in California, and I really don't have an opinion I care to express on what Californians should do when it comes to the poll this November. However, I do take exception with this campaign because it is manipulative and a direct attack on the church. Newsom said the billboards will display in 7 pro-life states: Texas, Indiana, Mississippi, Ohio, South Carolina, South Dakota, and Oklahoma. And at least he acknowledges that the people of these states are pro-life. Now, this is the billboard I take exception with. Note the use of a Bible verse, Mark 12:31. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no greater commandment than these. The use of this verse creates a contradiction within the billboard. For context, a group of Sadducees approached Jesus and asked him a question regarding the resurrection. Then in verse 28, it reads, "And one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, asked him, 'Which commandment is the most important of all?' Jesus answered, 'The most important is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these.'" Jesus' response is perhaps the most well-known verse in the Old Testament at this time. The most important is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength." This is a quote from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 and 5, and was called the Shema because the first word of the verse "hear" in Hebrew is Shema. Many Jews recited it morning and evening. It was widely held at this point in time to be the single most important command in the Torah. Jesus, however, goes a bit further by sharing a second command. The second is this, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." And this was a quote from Leviticus 19:18. Jesus gets asked which is the most important, but he gives 2. Given that the first is the first and the second is the second, we can, without a bunch of mental gymnastics, conclude that the second is subordinate to the first. Love the Lord your God, and that will guide you to love your neighbor. Almost universally, it is viewed that the first Jesus gives here is a summary of the first 4 from the 10 Commandments, and the second is a summary of the next 6. Why does this matter? Because to love your neighbor as yourself would be to live a life in which you honored your parents. You weren't willing to murder a baby. You would not commit adultery. You would not steal. You would not lie. And you would not covet the possessions of others, including someone's wife. It's one thing to use Scripture in such a manipulative way that you create some alternate universe in which followers of Christ will be guilted into supporting abortion. This, however, was the wrong verse. To love your neighbor as yourself means that you will love that child formed in the womb by God because it is also your neighbor. We all have a role to play in this process. We need more resources made available to help families that are in need. We need the cost for adoption to be lowered and less government bureaucracy in the process. We need better education on the risks of sex outside of marriage and a culture that champions people having enough respect for themselves that they believe they are worth the wait. To Gavin Newsom and those who convinced him this was a good idea, Jesus answered the Sadducees appropriately when they abused Scripture in Mark 12:24. Jesus said to them, "Is this not the reason you are wrong? Because you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God?"